Good afternoon. It is Wednesday, it is 12:30, and here I am to give you a quick 10 minutes on how to ask questions that create more sales. Now, if there was one area that so many people really underestimate the power of, it is the ability to ask questions. Now, if you're doing lots of what I call telling selling, you're telling people about what you do and how you do it, you're making it super hard for yourself. And so today I am going to share with you the principles of great sales questions, so that after this Facebook Live, you will have an understanding to test some questions when you're speaking with people that maybe you don't even know. You're probably already asking reasonably good questions to the people that you do know. So there's something that happens with people when they're having a sales conversation for the first time that actually kind of gets in the way of your natural flow. So I'm going to share with you some stuff today so that you can create really great questions, so that you can have those really great conversations and close more of those conversations into customers, clients and sales. So there are 5 words in which you can start an open question, a great open question, and that's who, what, when, where and how. Who, what, where, when and how. Now, any question that starts with any of those words is going to create dialogue. And what I mean by dialogue is they're not going to be able to answer yes or no. Now, 2 of those words are going to create more dialogue. So the more of those you ask, the easier it is for you to develop rapport and have a really great conversation. Now, if there was such a thing as the king of open questions, great discovery questions, that word would be what. So any question that starts with what, and especially if you add the word you, so what do you want to achieve? What problems are you having? What have you tried so far? What would be a great solution for you? If you ask what you questions, the person is going to deliver to you the criteria that's important in the area of the question that you've asked. So what questions always give you criteria, and the more criteria you know about the person you're speaking with, the easier it is to match what you do to what they need or want. So what questions with you are what I consider the king of open questions. So start creating as many of those as possible to start the conversation so that you get off on the right foot, because people love to talk about themselves, and when you ask lots of what questions, it really enables them to do that, and that makes it so much easier for you. Now, if there were a queen of open questions, that would be how, because that also leads to a lot of dialogue. And when you ask a how question tagged with a you, so how do you currently deal with this? How do you choose your suppliers? How do you react when you have a problem like this? When you ask how and you questions, what you are getting from the person is the process that they use when they are in that scenario. So the order and sequence in which they do things. And the more you know about how somebody does things, the easier it is for you to match your product or service to fit in line with their chosen process, their procedure that they use when they're in that scenario. So if you start conversations with what and how, then you are going to find it a lot easier to match what you do to what they want or need. And the other questions, who, where and when, will give you a bit of detail but are not going to give you the volume of dialogue that somebody normally responds with. Now, don't be put off if people don't answer your what and how questions with loads of detail, because if somebody is more of a big picture thinker, they're never going to give you lots of detail, so you're going to have to probe a little bit for that. So the first thing I would do in order for you to start to get a feel, get a sense of the kind of questions that are going to work for you, is to create a list of as many what and how questions with the word you, and then start to test them out. So when you go to networking events, whenever you're chatting with somebody, and they don't even have to, you know, if you want to practice, you can practice with people outside of business too and see what reaction you get. For those of you that have got children or teenagers especially that say, yeah, no, then you're probably asking the wrong type of questions. If you ask your teenage rebels open questions, then you're more likely to get fuller responses that can end up in a bit more of a conversation. So it's not just the businesses stuff, you know, you can use it everywhere. Now, there is a word that many people use, which is an open question, but it is definitely not to be used in a sales conversation or with a rebellious teenager. And that is the word why. And the reason for that is because why is very confronting. Why have you chosen that? Why do you do that? It's so confronting that it causes the person to go into defense mode. It arouses a part of the brain called the limbic system, which makes them much less resourceful, and therefore the response they give isn't generally a response that is unemotional. It's an emotional response which can lead to untruths, or maybe not giving you everything, or giving you a response that they think will pacify you, even if it's not exactly what's happening for them. So a why question is something that is very often used to get to identity level of the person. So if you're a therapist or a coach, you may well use why, and that's perfectly fine. But in a sales conversation, it's an absolute no-no. So if you ask things like, oh, why did you choose that supplier? That's going to create defensiveness. It's going to create a response that actually could give you inaccurate information and send you down an avenue of asking questions that are totally inappropriate. So it's much better to ask things like, what is it about that supplier that makes you think they're a good match for you? Or what is it about our product or service that makes you think it's less than perfect? So asking what questions will give you criteria. It's not about the person or their choice. You're not asking for justification of their thoughts, and that way you're going to keep them in a resourceful state and much better able to communicate that information to you. The other thing is that if you ask a why question, it can shatter the rapport that you've built up already, and you create a negative emotion inside that person, which means that they'll associate that negativity with you. And if that's a prospective customer, that really is not what you want to be doing. You want to be maintaining really positive associations of any communication with you. So get rid of any why questions. Get rid of all your closed questions. There's no purpose to them. They're just confirming whether what you're thinking is right or wrong. All a person can answer is yes or no. That only takes a second or two, which puts an awful lot of pressure on you. So start to come up with these what and how questions and create that rapport, create that information bank about the person you're speaking with so that you're able to match what they do. So going forward, create your list, test them out with people that you've not met before, and gauge the response. But please ask each question at least 3 times so that you get 3 different personalities in order to measure the impact, because some people will answer much fuller than others, and you can't just take one response as the definitive response to that question. And each time you ask that question, assess, did you get the information that your question was designed to get? Because very often, when I'm working with people, I'll say, what's the purpose of that question? They'll say, well, I want this information. And actually that question isn't designed to do that. So do you get the information that you want when you ask that question? And if you do, you know it's a great question. And in closing, I know I've done 10 minutes, but in closing, I just want to say one thing. A great question isn't a great question in terms of its construction. It's also a great question because it's asked at the appropriate time. So if you ask a question and it's appropriate, then that makes it a great question. Asking a great opening question is not a great question to ask at the end of the conversation. And asking a closing question is not a great question to ask at the beginning of a conversation. So what makes it a great question isn't just the way it's constructed, it's also when you ask it. So have fun with this. If you've got any questions about your questions, then please do jot them in the comments below. And if you want feedback on any of your questions, please do that too, with an explanation of the information that you want with that, and I'll give you feedback. Anyway, have fun with these. It's really fun to explore people's businesses using open questions. It will make your conversation so much more enjoyable, and I look forward to speaking with you next week on our next Facebook Live. Have an awesome Wednesday, an awesome rest of the week, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.